Well, Susan Shelley, welcome to State of Gold.
Thank you, John. It's wonderful to be here.
Great to have you. I've been watching you for some time and thinking about you and wanting you on the show. So this is great. We've got a lot we can cover. California has so many ailments. I want to talk about the economy, housing, healthcare, Prop 50 and the governor's race. If we can squeeze all that into 20 minutes. But let's start with the kitchen table issue affecting California's most, affordability. I want to ask you, which policy do you think is most increasing costs for Californians?
It's absolutely the climate mandates. It's 100% these crazy mandates to get to zero emissions everything and all electric power with all renewable power, rather, with no gas turbines and no nuclear and no hydro. They want to blow up the dams. They want to shut down the gas-fired electricity plants. They want to shut down the one nuclear plant. When I say they, I mean the environmentalists and the elected Democrats who are in that camp of believing that we must go to all solar and wind and a little bit of geothermal and whatever else we can invent in the meantime. It's completely unworkable. And making the effort to get to it is phenomenally expensive. You can look at electricity rates. They've doubled in 10 years in California. And 1 out of 5 utility customers is behind on paying their bill. People can't pay it. And this is unsustainable. And why are we doing this? It doesn't accomplish anything for the climate.
It's such a shame, and I think it's one of these massive, hidden in the open taxes. I think most Californians know that there are mandates. They know about 2035 and 2045 and eliminating gas-powered everything, but they don't necessarily connect that to their pocketbooks. But it is integrally connected. And of course, the legislature has just pivoted from cap and trade to what's called cap and invest, put that in quotes. And I think the other thing that citizens don't know is that these special funds can ultimately be used for anything that the government wants in many cases. So the train to nowhere has just been allocated, I believe, $20 billion over the next 20 years through the cap and invest program.
That's correct. And the Cap and Invest program is a hidden tax on energy. For people who aren't familiar with it, this is the way it works. The California Air Resources Board has been put in charge of reducing greenhouse gases in California.
Right.
They've decided to do it through this cap and trade, or now renamed cap and invest. By the way, invest is a synonym for tax when you get your ballot. Resources is tax, funding is tax,
Right.
and invest is tax. So the cap and invest program requires all of these emitters, the so-called polluters, which are your electricity generation facilities, oil refineries, manufacturers, everybody who's emitting greenhouse gases and is in this program has to buy a permit to operate. And the cost of that permit is going into the price of everything. For every metric ton of greenhouse gas that they emit, they pay $50 for the permit per metric ton. That adds about 50 cents to the price of gasoline. So the
Right.
prices of these permits fluctuate depending on demand and regulation, but the whole thing is not really a market, as they say it is. It's government force. They've essentially prohibited these companies from operating, and then they sell them the right to do so, and the cost is passed through in everything you buy in California, which is one reason that this state's so much more expensive than the others.
Right. It's so well put, Susan. And we had Kevin Dalton on the show the other day, the California activist who rails on X about all the craziness in California from Idaho, but he still
From
loves
Idaho.
California. Yeah, moved to Idaho. But one thing he said that really rings true is, our energy companies are attacked for quote unquote gouging our consumers. But what Kevin said was, isn't it interesting that all of these massive energy companies have chosen to somehow gouge California way more than the rest of the country? I'm winking here, and somehow increase our energy expenses, natural gas 50% more than the rest of the country, electricity per kilowatt hour up to 2 times more than the rest of the country. Somehow we think that they're gouging California consumers and not the rest of the country. I don't think so. It's policy that you've just laid out, Susan, that is the inputs that are going into the costs that are passed along to consumers.
That's correct. And essentially, what's happening is the governor does not want to be blamed for the consequences of his policies. So twice he's called a special session to crack down on the oil industries for gouging. Every report that's been done by the California Energy Commission and anyone else shows they're not gouging California. It's the cost of operating here. It's the regulations. It's the special blends. It's all of the things that they have to do to comply with this state. And honestly, regulatory compliance in California is a torture that the Spanish Inquisition would admire. It's unbelievable what these companies have to go through just to report to the government what they're doing. And there's always a proposal every year to add even more reporting and even more compliance. And you're paying for that. I can't stress that enough. They say they're cracking down on polluters. This is gasoline, electricity, anything that's transported in California in a truck, like food. You're paying for this. And there's an additional problem with this climate mandate. It's the housing problem. People don't realize that there are restrictions in California on where you can build housing. You can't go beyond the urban boundary because supposedly driving to work is bad for the climate. Now, if you believe that driving to work in California is affecting the global climate, I have a bridge to sell you, because this is not doing anything. So
Yep.
even if you think that climate change is hideously dangerous and all our fault, what California is doing is ineffective. And everyone will admit that if you press them. And here's what they say: California must show leadership.
Yeah.
How much should we be paying to lead China, to lead India, to lead Germany? How much should California residents not be able to buy a house, not be able to drive their cars, pay more for food? How much more should we pay in California to show leadership to the rest of the world, which is paying no attention?
Yeah, you said so many good things. Just one thing on environmentalism. That movement started in the 70s in California with a good intent.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, we all want clean air, clean water, clean atmosphere. We all want it. And California has more environmental laws on the books than I think probably any other state and probably any other nation state in the world. We should enforce them. We should enforce the laws on the books, but at the same time balance industry and productivity and costs for our consumers. And we can do both. I mean, we are the greatest state in the country. We should act like it. Let's talk about taxes, Susan. You've been a hawk on taxes and speaking out about taxes. In general, what should Californians know about the taxes they're paying, what they're actually getting or not getting for their money in California?
Well, Californians pay the highest income tax rates and the highest state sales tax rates and the highest gas tax rates, not to mention the highest gas prices. And we now have a budget in the state that's in excess of $300 billion a year, which I think is roughly double from where it was when Governor Gavin Newsom took office.
60% higher.
So it's tremendous. It's a tremendous amount of overspending. And they're required to have a balanced budget. And here's how they do it. They just say it's balanced. They just project how much revenue they need to balance whatever spending they want to do. And then they do crazy bookkeeping accounting that the California State Auditor and the legislative analysts look at that and they say, this is optimistic. This is optimistic what they've projected here. And that's how they get away with it. And some of the spending is just outrageous. And then there isn't enough money for the basic services that government needs to provide.
Right, 100%. Prop 13. Prop 13 is one of these evergreen, controversial propositions. What's your view on Prop 13? Do you think there's, for instance, we talk about home buying and the next generation not being able to afford a home, which is the fear of, I think, every parent and anyone with kids coming up. Things are so expensive in California. Would you extend the Prop 13 benefit to new home buyers, first-time home buyers as an example, to make that more accessible? And what in general do you think should happen with Prop 13?
Well, let me explain what Prop 13 does, because I think there's some confusion out there because it was such a long time ago that it passed. All property in California is under Prop 13. Even a house that you bought yesterday, it is protected by Prop 13. Before Prop 13, property was taxed in California at the market rate. That was your taxable value, the market rate, every year. So it would adjust up as prices were pushed up. And then the tax rate was 2.67% statewide average. So every year you would owe 2.67% average of the market rate of your home as a condition of keeping it. People were being driven out of their property. They were being taxed to death right out of their property. And Howard Jarvis was an activist who tried 5 times to get Prop 13 on the ballot and finally succeeded in 1978. So here's what Prop 13 did. It said that for as long as you own your property, your taxable value can only go up a maximum of 2% a year. So the market could go up 10%.
Right.
Your taxable value does not. You have certainty and protection. And the tax rate was cut to 1%. So even if you bought your house in California yesterday, you are protected by Prop 13 and you're paying less than you would have if Prop 13 had never passed.
Mm-hmm.
And the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association has a calculator so you can see what you'd be paying. Don't do it if you have a pacemaker. Don't do it if you're driving. But it's at guessinggame.org. And you just type in the market value of your property, push the button, and that's what you'd be paying under the old rules if Prop 13 had never passed.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank God for Prop 13. So let's talk about housing also, because, in the same vein, Newsom signed SB 79 October 10th, which ostensibly is a part of an agenda which we all support to increase housing production. But some of these laws have moral hazards and de facto hazards. This is supposed to accelerate development of multifamily around transit, which sounds good, but it also has an impact on neighborhoods that are primarily single-family homes. What's your take on SB 79? But if we also zoomed out to find the balance between advancing production of homes of all kinds, which we need, and preserving some of the character and rights of owners?
Well, the first thing is we should drop this urban boundary concept that says you can't drive to work because it's bad for the climate. So they have stopped the development of single-family homes in new communities. That was always the way that housing was provided. From the end of World War II forward, they would build new communities and people would be able to buy single-family homes if that's what they wanted, and rent apartments in the city if that's what they preferred. There were options. Suddenly, we have stopped. And when I say suddenly, I think this dates back to about 2006, 2008, different pieces of legislation that were passed that created this metric of vehicle miles traveled as a CEQA impact, the California Environmental Quality Act. So if it's an impact, then you have to pay a lot of money to mitigate the impact or you can't build the project. So it becomes not only scarce, but also expensive when they can build it. That's the reason we don't have enough housing. Other states are building homes and California is not. So the idea of people like Senator Scott Wiener is that you can only build dense housing near transit because his ideal is everyone lives in an apartment and doesn't own a car. It's not practical in most of California to live that way. In Los Angeles, where I am, it's ridiculous to say that you could use public transit to get everywhere you need to go in your life. So all the people who live in these SB 79 apartment buildings with no parking spaces will still have cars. And most of the units don't have to be affordable, so there may be a lot of roommates to make that rent payment.
Right.
And they'll all have cars. And where are they going to park? Well, if you build these buildings on a single-family lot, which is what SB 79 allows within half a mile of a transit stop, by the way, defined all the way down to a dedicated bus lane, which is just a bucket of paint and a stripe on the street, and you've rezoned the neighborhood. If you have an apartment building on a street of single-family homes, it's going to become a completely different experience for everyone who lives there. People will be driving around the block for hours, fighting over parking spaces. They'll wind up with permit parking, tow trucks at 7 o'clock. It's going to be a completely changed habitat. They couldn't do this to you if you were a spotted owl or a Delta smelt. They'd have to consider that putting a 7-story apartment building right next to single-family homes, and then more of them will pop up, and you'll have this construction site atmosphere on the street as house after house is sold to developers. That is a tremendous impact on people who spent their life savings and their life's earnings to not live in density, to live in a single-family neighborhood with trees and not apartment walls out their windows and people staring into their backyard. So I think they are taking something that people bought. I think it's a violation of their property rights, of their right to the peaceful enjoyment of property. It overrides the city governments. The city of Los Angeles, the city council voted to oppose SB 79. One of the reasons is the cost of the infrastructure that's going to be needed. So when you replace a single-family home with a 7-story apartment building, water, sewer, power, who's going to pay for that? So let's say they do this and the local government puts a tax on the ballot or a bond measure on the ballot. These taxes will be paid by property owners. So now you've outnumbered the property owners with renters by a 20-to-1 margin or something along those lines. The renters will feel they don't have to pay that tax. Why wouldn't they vote for it? And the homeowners will see that on their property tax bill
Right.
for 30 years. And that, I think, is also a tremendous incursion on people's rights, to outnumber them on their own street, to turn the street into a construction zone, to cause this need for taxes, to change the entire experience of living that people in the neighborhood saved and paid to have, and to force it on city governments with no approval process where the impact can be considered. I think for all those reasons, this is terrible policy. And one more thought on SB 79. One of the justifications given for it was that transit doesn't have enough passengers, and transit is losing money at the fare box. And building these apartments with no parking spaces will force people to use transit. You know, there are a lot of things a lot of ways to make transit more usable. They
Yeah.
could clean it up. They could make it safe. They could deal with the fact that it's not safe to walk to some of these train platforms or bus stops and wait for 20 minutes for a train. It's not safe to stand there. The sidewalks are covered with filth and litter, and people are living on them, and they don't want to do anything about that in many of these cities, or what they want to do is incredibly expensive and not practical. And they expect that SB 79 is going to fix the problem of transit ridership. I don't think it is. There are a lot of things the government could be doing better besides rezoning people's single-family neighborhoods.
Wow. You just made such a cogent summary there, argument, Susan, about this piece of legislation that was really good. It's a great example of government overreach, unintended consequences, moral hazards, and also forcing something down people's throats they may not want. It's the opposite of freedom. I mean, there's a kernel of goodness there, which is more units for more kinds of people, but at the expense of so much. So I appreciate that. Let's finish with some rapid fire, Susan.
Okay?
A few questions, just one word, one phrase, and yeah, your reaction. You're queen for a day. The single biggest thing you do to fix California.
I suspend the targets for climate greenhouse gas reductions. If you did that, California would be instantly more affordable.
California leader you most admire.
If you want to go back, I'm a tremendous admirer, of course, of Ronald Reagan. I thought he was inspirational and used his communication skills and his ability to understand the problems and the public, and his writing ability. I think he's very underrated for how good he was, and so I'm a tremendous admirer of President Reagan.
Got it. Was there a craziest political moment as a journalist you observed or experienced?
I have to say it was a long moment, but the craziest thing I've seen was the COVID pandemic response in California. That was insane. From closing the skate parks and the beaches to forcing the small businesses to close while the big businesses stayed open, to forcing the schools closed until the teachers union agreed to open them, letting Governor Newsom allowing all of the local unions to negotiate with their individual districts to open the schools. I thought that whole thing was absolutely insane. The snitch lines, the vaccine mandates, I thought the whole COVID pandemic response in California, including the incredible amount of financial fraud, was the craziest thing I've ever seen.
That's a good call out. Last one. California is fill in the blank.
California is singular. It is a singular place, and we must fight for it.
So well said. And Susan, in closing, let's hear about your special initiative, why it's so important.
Well, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association has the Save Prop 13 initiative right now out for signatures. And everyone can go to saveprop13.com and print an official petition at home, sign it, and mail it in. Complete instructions are in the PDF. It's very easy, and what it will do is protect the parts of Prop 13 that make it harder to raise other taxes besides your property tax, parcel taxes, sales taxes, income taxes, everything else. All the local taxes. It will protect you from tax increases that show up on your ballot in every election and then pass more easily than they should because of court-created loopholes. So that's at
Right.
saveprop13.com.
SaveProp13.com. I'm going to go there right after we finish. Susan, thank you so much for this conversation. Really
Thank you,
enjoyed it.
Jon. It's a pleasure to be with you.